Possible tariffs from President-elect Donald Trump once he's president. If they're imposed, they may remain a key threat to the Canadian economy, including the manufacturing sector. That's why today the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Association has sent a letter to the federal government calling for immediate short-term relief for manufacturers. For more, let's bring Dennis Darby, President and CEO of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. Hi, Dennis. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, Mark. I'm glad to be here.
Now, in this letter, you say that these U.S. tariffs, if and when they're introduced, would present a severe risk to the manufacturers sector, basically in Canada. Can you flesh that out for us?
Yeah, let's to quantify it a bit. Of our $1 billion a day trade with the U.S., about 2/3 are manufactured goods. And it's about half of our manufactured output. So for the 1.8 million Canadians who work in the sector and the 40 or 50,000 companies across Canada, tariffs would have a couple of effects. Immediately, obviously, it would have an inflationary effect on the U.S. and vice versa on Canada because so many goods pass back and forth. But we've surveyed our members across Canada, even without having details, and even today, we've seen about a third of companies have delayed capital or equipment purchase plans. Another quarter have frozen hiring. And we've been short of staff for years. And so what we're seeing already is a bit of a chill in anticipation of some level of tariffs.
We know that Prime Minister Trudeau is meeting with the premiers today to discuss this tariff threat. Now, you're looking for some sort of short-term tariff relief. What would that look like?
Well, so sure. One of the things we put forward to the leaders is that having lived through this in 2018 with the steel and aluminum tariffs, if Canada decides to respond, especially, we'll need to have some kind of tariff or short-term tariff relief for Canadian companies, right through to tax relief measures. We really do have to increase our investment attraction and support because one of the outcomes, or one of the problems is we've talked to our members and fewer than 10% of them could absorb that 25%, and we know passing it on to the U.S. customer is going to be difficult. So Canada's industry will be under an incredible financial pressure from its customers if it wants to maintain those markets. And so the impact, and especially if Canada responds, which they probably will, depending on how and when the scope of the tariffs, how do we put tax relief measures for companies while we're in this battle? And of course, a trade war with the U.S. is the last thing Canada can afford because they are so important to our industry, and they're much more important to us than we are to them, of course. So I think governments need to start thinking about that in the short run, including everything from work sharing programs to some tax relief. But long term, we really have to get to a point where we can be more resilient because competition is going to get even tougher especially with the approach the U.S. government appears to want to take.
Right. So speaking of the long term, you'd like to see some long-term structural reforms. You've been touching on it a little bit here, but what would those be, and how realistic is it to think that this current government or the next government would institute these things and they'd actually come to pass?
Well, first of all, it doesn't matter, whoever is in government, we need comprehensive tax reform, including things like the accelerated capital cost allowance, which has been in place for a number of years and is scheduled to go out at the end of the year. Those kind of things need to be made permanent. We do have to have some regulatory reform. We've seen, time and again, Canada is a more complicated and slower place to invest. We need internal trade liberalization. We talk about the tariffs with the U.S., but we have a number of sort of, what I would call non-tariff barriers between the provinces to trade. And probably we need to look at a buy Canadian strategy. We tend to not do that as Canadians. Governments don't tend to be sort of on the home team in terms of buy Canadian for procurement. Some provinces do, but I think in a situation where the U.S. is going to be much more aggressive, we need to think about all those things because Mark, we have underinvested on our manufacturing sector for so many years. Very much driven by the fact that the U.S. could take all of our production, by and large, 3/4 of our production, and what that meant was we probably haven't invested, enough in new plants, equipment, in technology. This is the time, nothing like a huge threat like this to say, boy, we better really up our game because it'll be a much tougher world we're dealing with.
Dennis, you say that Canadian manufacturers stand ready to work with policymakers and parliamentarians to develop solutions that protect jobs and improve the supply chain and so on. How tight are those ties currently, and how influential are manufacturers when they are trying to help set policy?
Well, first of all, we have great relationships with the current industry minister and the industry innovation department, and with the key economic development ministers in the provinces in Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec. So we do have a very close relationship and work very well. And the provinces, have an equally important role here in terms of providing those incentives and those conditions to favor more investment. So we do have CME has been around almost over 150 years, and we have been working with government since the 1870s when we had we'll go back in history. There's been tariff wars with the U.S. many times in the last 150 years. And how do we get through them? And part of our role, because we represent everybody from steel and oil and gas, aluminum, food, consumer products and cosmetics, as well as as aerospace and automotive. So we represent that broad swath of the industrial sector, which is really what's it seems to be in the crosshairs of the incoming president's attention. And so I think this is right now is a very uncertain time, but certainly a chance for Canada to really stand up. And we're very, very hopeful. But one thing I'd say, let's wait to see what the size and scope of what Mr. Trump wants to do, and we should work together to figure out what is our appropriate response.